Everyone's heard of the infamous table flip, that moment when a board game, almost definitely Monopoly, becomes so heated, so intense, so infuriating that a player upends the board, sending bits, pieces, hopes, dreams, and friendships scattered to the four winds. Laurie's definitely done it. Heck, after some Blood on the Clock Tower games, I've seen him flip the entire internet over, and of course I've never done it myself, and to all those who say I have, good luck proving it in court. A table flip is one thing, but sometimes, some unfortunate times, tempers run hotter than that, and what should be a pleasant way to pass the time becomes violent, and in some cases, even deadly. Now, to be completely upfront, this list is going to stray into sensitive areas, talking about actual deaths in some cases. We're not going to show any gruesome images or dwell on injuries in any graphic detail, but for those who don't like hearing about that kind of stuff, maybe skip this one. For everyone else, let's take a trip to the darkest sides of both the tabletop hobby and the human soul, without passing go or collecting $200. I'm Adam from No Rolls Barred, and here are 10 board games that led to real-life violence. Before we start the list, what's the worst reaction you've seen someone have to a board game in real life? Share your hopefully not too serious stories below in the comments. We'll reply as well. And as you do, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because honestly, it does make more of a difference than you think. Number 10, Ouija made me do it. Okay, fair enough, Ouija is more of an activity than a game, but it's also one of the most infamous bits of tabletop entertainment in history, and by far and away what was most associated with the concept of domesticated Satanism by the pearl-clutching scaredy brats of the Satanic Panic. For those who don't know, the Ouija board was invented way back in the late 19th century and marketed as a fun game that allowed spirits to respond to questions like a magic 8-ball, but with more ritual and suggestion, and also spookums. Boo! People touch an object, ask a question, and via spiritual possession, but rather it's group suggestion, unconscious movement, and suggestive psychology, the object moves around the board to answer that question. So far, so harmless, spiritual tinged fun. Then, The Exorcist came out in the 70s, poor Reagan got possessed after playing with a Ouija board, and after several pee-chunders and suggestions about what our lovely mothers do in hell,
your mother sucks cocks in hell,
the toy became branded a tool of Satan. And you know what tools of Satan are super useful for? Pinning your murders on, turns out. People began to blame Ouija boards for all sorts of killings. In 2012, a 15-year-old in Weslaco, Texas, stabbed his friend in the stomach, who thankfully survived, and when questioned said, "The Ouija board told me to do it." And in 2014, a man drowned his dog in a bathtub after becoming convinced she'd been possessed by a spirit after he'd played Ouija with his wife. There are countless stories of people pinning horrific real-life happenings on what is essentially a toy, and it's real sad and it's real scary. Number 9, Dungeons and Dragons and Hammers. And speaking of tabletop games that people were convinced harbored demonic energy, let's move on to Dungeons and Dragons, the patron saint of imaginative nerds the world over. For a deeper dive into D&D's accusations of Satanism, check out the board game history video we made. Luke made it, and the boy done good. This incident, however, isn't about demonic possession, it's about something far more real and deadly: hurt feelings. In 2009, in Cedar City, Utah, a man called Zachary Frank King was playing D&D with two friends, a fellow player and a dungeon master. According to the subsequent trial, a disagreement between all three started when King perceived the DM as acting cocky and not liking what that DM was doing with his character. And hey, a DM playing fast and loose with your character is a dick move. I think it's part of the 10 Commandments, but it doesn't excuse what came next, when King left and returned later in the night, attacking both the DM and the fellow player with a hammer, leaving both men with permanent injuries, but thankfully still alive. Number 8, a man brings a gun to a battleship fight. No one likes it when someone sinks their battleship. People who play Battleship don't like it. Most battleship captains don't like it, and Rihanna didn't like it. A tough time across the board. But the board game Battleship manages to mitigate against tempers flaring up all the time with the simple strategy of being really bloody boring. Despite that, in late 2014, the Utah County Police were called to a trailer after a 911 call. Outside the trailer, they found a pair of Battleship boards smashed on the ground, and inside, they found a drunk man, John Valenzuela, who, drunk and enraged at being accused of cheating at the game by his 17-year-old daughter, had pointed a loaded gun at her and barred her from leaving his trailer. In this case, thankfully no one was seriously hurt, but that is a deeply scary way to be about an incredibly tedious game. I would hate to see what happened if that family played Jenga. Number 7, the Domino's murders, not to be confused with the Domino's pizza murders, which were almost certainly committed by the Noid, although the investigation is ongoing, so I should say allegedly. Instead, the title of this entry refers to two murders that were actually committed within 12 months of each other, and both stemming from games of dominoes, gone wrong. Dominoes isn't really a game you associate with intense arguments, more like older gentlemen playing a relaxing game in the park, but turns out humans are scary as all hell and can find any reason to lose their cool. In December 2010, on Christmas Eve no less, a man stabbed one of his roommates to death in Wichita, Kansas over a heated game of bones, and across the country in Pelion, South Carolina, in December 2011, a 34-year-old man called Robert Banks Jr. shot his 33-year-old younger brother to death after a heated argument, again over a game of dominoes. Both men were arrested and convicted of the murders, and now I'm honestly never going to look at those old guys playing dominoes in the park the same way again. Number 6, a Phase 10 disagreement between OAPs ends in death. So look, as much as I can mine a whole bunch of comedy from throwing a quizzical look at not intense games and wondering how they can lead to intense enough fights to end in violence, it's clear that in most, if not all these cases, the blood was already bad. The board game just happened to be the trigger that set the violence in motion, and again, humans terrifying. And really, that has to be the explanation here when a scuffle between two senior citizens in Cocoa Beach, Florida broke out after a game of Phase 10, which is a card game that's basically rummy, but longer, and so much longer, and it only ends when one player completes 10 missions, and each mission takes forever, and oh, for the love of God, the game never ends. So okay, maybe I could actually see someone getting killed over Phase 10. In 2008, a 72-year-old man, Richard Fortner, got irate at a fellow player, 68-year-old Marian Kachnik, because he was helping another player at the table. The dispute peaked with Fortner telling Kachnik to get out of his house or he'd fetch his gun. The gun was fetched, and during a brief scuffle, the gun was used. Kachnik died, and Fortner was sentenced to 20 years in prison. And speaking of card games gone wrong, number 5, woman shoots her husband after a bad game of bridge. Again, bridge is the kind of game you associate with the Golden Girls, playful old dears frowning at you from the other side of cigarette-stained felt tables. But like everything else on this list, what was supposed to be a nice way to pass the time left someone with no more time to pass. Bridge is an interesting game insofar as it's not played individually, but rather in pairs, with you forming a partnership with the player sitting across from you and working with them to bid and win tricks. I won't go further into the rules of bridge because we'll tie ourselves up in diagrams, but all you need to know is that relying on someone else to win a game is a first-class ticket to Stressville, a town on the outskirts of Resentmentburg. In 1929, husband and wife John and Myrtle Bennett sat down and partnered up for a game of bridge, and needless to say, it didn't go well. After a run of either bad luck or bad play, Myrtle declared John to be, quote, a bum bridge player, which is apparently the worst thing you can call someone in the Roaring Twenties, as a fight between the two broke out that ended with Myrtle pulling a gun and shooting her husband to death, proving that their issues were definitely not water under the... No, I don't want to. Like, it was nearly 100 years ago, but I don't want to. Number 4, sons kill their mother over a game of Yahtzee. This is such a bizarre and horrible story. You keep sifting through it and trying to find the missing piece that makes it all make sense. But if there is one, it's never made it to the public. All we know is that on Christmas Day in 2010, in Alberta, Minnesota, a tiny town of only about 100 people, Tamara Lee Mason was killed by her 2 teenage sons, Andrew and Jacob Cobb, and their half-brother Dylan Clemens, before her body was stashed in a shed while the boys waited for the ground to thaw enough to bury her. The reason why, apparently, was that Mason and her children had come home from a Christmas party and she wanted to play the classic push your luck dice game Yahtzee, and they didn't. I mean, obviously there's something else happening here, but that's the legit reason the sons gave the police as to why they killed their mother, because they didn't want to play Yahtzee. It is very strange, said Stevens County Sheriff Randy Willis. She wanted to play Yahtzee, and they didn't. That seemed to be, in their minds, what expedited her sudden demise. It's a baffling and deeply unsettling case. It's like Fargo, but with fewer jokes and a classic dice game that actually holds up. I mean, I'd play Yahtzee on Christmas Day. I don't think I deserve to be killed for that. Number 3, horrific things happen after chess games. Chess is widely regarded as a game for intellectuals and master strategists. Turns out it's also a game for cannibals and Antarctic psychopaths. This list was certainly something to put together, despite its aura as a game for higher minds. If a game's been around for as long as chess, then yes, surely someone's been killed over it, and indeed, yes, we can name 2 high-profile and utterly bizarre cases. The first is from 2014, when 2 men came to blows over a game of chess in Dublin, with a man called Tom O'Gorman being killed by his lodger, who then cut open his chest and tried to eat O'Gorman's heart, but ended up just eating a bit of his lung, which is not that... That's a secret rule in chess if it is a rule. Almost as crazy as an event from the 1950s where Soviet researchers were playing chess at an Antarctic research station, and you know that bit from The Thing where MacReady kills the computer with a drink because she's a bitch? Well, this is like that, except instead of a drink, it's an axe, with one researcher killing and chopping up a colleague after a game of chess gone sour. I mean, prolonged isolation and heart-stopping cold will do that to the human mind, and this isn't a cheerful list. Sorry. Number 2, the Monopoly murders. It's not really that surprising, is it? Like if I told you that in the 80 years of its existence, that one of the most frustrating, luck-driven and cruel-spirited games ever made has led to actual human murder, it just sounds right, doesn't it? And sure enough, Monopoly has blood on its hands. In Santa Fe, New Mexico, a woman called Laura Chavez attacked her boyfriend Clyde with a kitchen knife when she suspected him of cheating. In 2009, a man in Michigan attacked a friend when she refused to sell him Park Place and Boardwalk. In both those cases, thankfully no one died, but there have been Monopoly deaths. Of course there have. In 1991, a young couple murdered a 56-year-old man they were lodging with after a blow-up over the game. And in an even more insane story than that, two friends, Mark Chenkowski and Michael Kluchnik, argued over Monopoly house rules. We've all been there, but then this argument escalated to the point where Mark shot his friend Michael in the chest with a bow and arrow, killing him. We haven't all been there. All things considered, that awkward drunken scene your dad made over a Monopoly board last Christmas doesn't quite seem so bad now. And number 1, ancient Chinese game leads to war. In the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. In the ancient Chinese game of liubo, you win or you throw a massive strop about it, chuck the wooden board you're playing on at the head of the son of one of the most powerful princes in the country, who then never forgives you and leads a rebellion against you years later, leading to the deaths of thousands of people. It's not as catchy, sure, but it is at least true. Let's unpack that. Liubo is a game created in China sometime in the first millennium BCE. It's a monster grandpa ancient game, so much so that the rules are lost to time, but we know this is what the board looked like. Careful, you could kill someone with one of those, and that's exactly what happened. The man who would go on to become Emperor Jing of the Han Dynasty was playing a game with Liu Hian, the son of Liu Pi, the prince of the nation-state of Wu. An argument between the two men broke out and Liu Hian died after the liubo board was thrown at his head. And turns out, sorry I dinged your son to death when I rage quit ancient snakes and ladders isn't a mega convincing apology. The Wu prince, beside himself at the death of his son, began consolidating wealth and power, which eventually erupted into something called the Rebellion of the Seven States, when Liu Pi united 7 kingdoms of ancient China in an uprising against the new Emperor Jing a mere 3 years after he ascended to the throne. The rebellion lasted for 3 months before eventually being quashed, leaving thousands of soldiers dead, all because of history's most destructive table flip. And that's our list. Again, remind us in the comments of the weirdest board gaming tantrum you've ever seen. Like and share this video around the internet if you enjoyed it, and make sure you subscribe to No Rolls Barred for more silly board game content. Well, hopefully a bit more silly than this list in the future. Get on board.